Hi everyone. In this particular demo, I'm going to keep it separate. This will be an in-depth look at my techniques, all the equipment I use to create my acrylics. This is going to be very important to follow this particular demo from start to finish. The reason why is if you skip ahead in this one, you may miss something very important that I did to get me to that point. For example, how I mix my paints, I use jars with Teflon lids with a pre-mixed paint that is pretty much a syrupy consistency instead of squirting out heavy sludgy paint that will dry even quicker, but then will also waste a lot of paint as you squirt it out. So for me, I like working out of a jar, open up the lid, perfectly airtight, take my brush and dip it right down into the paint and pull it out and mix it with what paints I want to mix it with on the glass pellet. In some cases, for a background color, a gray, blue, whatever the case may be, I may have a pre-mixed color that I could always go back to and know that is going to match perfectly with the color I started with. Trying to mix those colors, if you want a painterly effect, that's fine. If you want a perfect solid color, then you may want to pre-mix it. Now we have a lot of things to go over. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's go over the jars. Now the jars are probably one of the most important part of my equipment because of the consistency of the paint that I want to use. It is very important for me to keep the consistency the same throughout using that particular color. If I start to squirt out colors on the glass palette straight from the tube, they will either start to dry out or they'll start to get sludgy, and I'll have to keep mixing the paints as I go, and I will always end up with a different type of mix. For that reason, I like to keep them pre-mixed the way I like to use them. Then this way, when I go to the canvas, the board, whatever I'm painting on, the paint will be a consistency of the same. That way I don't start to run into a dry brush effect or even get too soupy that then it even also becomes a little bit tougher to blend where it's too runny or too much water in it that it may not cover right, and then I would also then worry about adhesion issues. Now with that said, keeping them pre-mixed, here is a 1 ounce jar. This is the lid, the Teflon lids, they work really well. And then here is the same size 2 ounce jar. And what I use these for is bigger paintings. If I want to make sure I don't run out of a pre-mixed color, it's very difficult to match the exact same color. Now, for example, I have 3 different types of white here. That this one is the titanium white thick, and it's pretty thick because it's doesn't pour very good at all. This would be for quick cover-ups, that if I want to take out a darker color before I put down a yellow, orange, or red, if I want to keep those colors snappy, then I would white something out first and then put those snappy colors over it. Otherwise, if I try to take somewhat of a transparent yellow back over a real deep gray or even a blackish color, then I might end up with more of a greenish yellow than just a true nice snappy yellow. The thin is just a more thin down version of the thick. Then it will allow me to spread it a little bit more. And then obviously the transparent white is even a thinner version yet, which is where I want to just add very subtle highlights or just very small amounts of a lighter color at a time. Because then keep in mind, once I start whitening things out towards the end, then I could still take a very thin glazing of color back over that white if it becomes too white. Now, here's the same thing for the grays. Then I have grays mixed, and often if I label them, then that's pretty much a color I'm going to try to stay with and always have. If it's a neutral tint, if it's a blue gray, a warm gray, then that's what I will do. And then also if they're real light, then this one is a real light gray for barely changing a value at all, so to speak. Now here's one thing I want to say about jars. When I put my labels on, these are the ones that I'm always going to keep as colors. I have quite a few. of any color I use. Here's just another raw sienna, but these are the newer jars and the newer labels. This one is an older one. This is one I had forever. And believe it or not, the color of this label was once this color. I've had some of these jars for literally decades, and they've kept my colors and paints really well and perfectly protected in a airtight environment. Now this one, for example, I'll show you just as an example. Some of the water, some of the matte medium will pretty much separate out and float to the top. All I would do is put a brush upside down, make sure it's stirred up good, and then rub the brush along the edge of the jar, get off as much as I can, and it would be ready to use. In that respect, what I can do then is colors that sit for a while, they may need stirred up a little bit or just redone over, so to speak, to make sure that I'm not painting with a separated color. And the labels themselves, one last note, I put a piece of packing tape over it because every now and then, if I do get any kind of paint that I'd like to clean off in running water, then the packing tape will seal the paper and it'll keep my label nice, that I could then wash off the inside of the lid real well and not worry about damaging my label. And these, again, like I said, some of these colors I've had. Here's another one. Some of these I had for decades out of the same jar, and they work really well. Okay, now this could be just a basic layout of the jars I would use at any given time for a painting. Now, for example, even any given painting, I could use quite a few different combinations of colors throughout the painting. If I'm working on any particular rocks, trees, anything, it may call for a specific amount of colors used. When I'm working on that, then I could just have just those colors out and arrange them any way I want. This is raw sienna, burnt sienna, and these three are mixed grays. This is pretty much French ultramarine blue with burnt umber mixed, and then this is the same, but a little bit of titanium white in, and then this is a little bit more titanium white in, just to lighten up that gray. This is my heavy titanium white, this is my thin, and this is my transparent white, and then this is my straight matte medium, and then if I even want to, I could add just plain water in another jar. I just use a squirt bottle, and it does real good when I want to add water to any of these jars if I first start mixing up my colors. That's what we will go over before we paint. And then what I will do is just grab, just say for example, a little bit of light gray, put it down, grab a little bit of raw sienna, and if you'll notice, the raw sienna is on top of the brush, on top of the light gray. There is no light gray in my raw sienna. It happens every now and then, but it's not worth mentioning for all it happens, because now if I put this down, now I can mix these two colors any way I want, and now that I already have my light gray mixed, it's a lot closer than trying to mix my burnt umber, French ultramarine blue, white, and raw sienna. I have a color combination that I could get to the end result much faster. Now, if I leave these colors open for any length of time, then what I want to do is just take my mist bottle, just a generic cheap mist bottle, and then just hit them 1 or 2 pumps each one, and then that's it. They're good for another anywhere from 15 minutes to a half hour or so. It depends on how dry your situations are. If I want to grab another color, a little bit of burnt sienna, put it down. What I could do is keep it on one side of the gray and keep the raw sienna on the other side, and then I could get variations of all three depending on how I want to mix my colors. And then if I'm done with any of these, I can put the lid on, put them back, grab new colors, add them and subtract them as I go. Okay, we'll take this new jar. Here's the lid. And I'll just mix up a little bit of Payne's Gray. I never use it, believe it or not. I always mix my grays. I always want a warmer or cooler gray unless I need an exact neutral, but very seldom can I get an exact neutral. This might be a little bit more brownish than the Payne's Gray, but once you start painting with them and it starts to get transparent, then that's where you'll see the difference. Now what I'll do is take my matte medium, add a little bit of that, and then about the same amount of water with my squirt bottle, and then mix that up with any kind of back end of a brush. And I want to make sure it mixed up's good. And even though it looks light, that is the matte medium. It will dry as a Payne's Gray. So that's where acrylics could be a little bit deceiving, that once you mix them up good, there's your Payne's Gray, but it has a little bit of water in it and a little bit of matte medium just to make it very spreadable. And then here's the difference. This is a little bit more bluish, where as my mixed gray, a little bit brownish. So that's how I mix my colors. That's the idea of having jars. Now I can even put this back as a ready-to-go Payne's Gray if I ever decide to need to use it for anything. But the jars themselves, in my opinion, are worth their weight in gold. They are not cheap. They are very expensive for Teflon lids, but any kind of jar that you are sure that it could be airtight, if you're going to leave them sit for a while, then that would be a good investment. That once I start painting with any of this paint made, whatever's left, I leave it dry, mist it with water, and it'll scrape right up with a razor blade. And then that's it. Then I'm ready to change colors, take a break, whatever I want to do. It all works out very well using jars. Let's go ahead and paint a little bit just to see what we could come up with as far as the do's and don'ts of painting. Okay, the first thing I want to show you is just going over your canvas board, whatever you may be using, with a solid color. Now here I have the light blue, and I'm going to put it down on my palette and then start painting it in. But because I do mix my paints fairly thin with water and matte medium, then they don't cover very well. So in some cases I may need 2, 3, maybe even sometimes 4 coats before it completely covers. But when you have your color pre-mixed and you're working from that color, you don't have to worry about matching the colors because you already have it made. That's one big advantage of jars. Now also, we have to be careful though when we apply multiple coats. And I'll show you why. We're going to get some paint out. And I'm going to start painting this in. Now just to let everybody know, I sealed this board with a layer, couple layers of the gel watered down, same I use to seal my final paintings. Otherwise the paper would really suck it up fast. Now what I want to show you is something I have to do exactly wrong, and that is we have to make sure if we give anything multiple coats, we have to make sure that we leave things dry long enough to make sure they're dry. Otherwise we may have problems lifting up the first coat even though it looks dry or feels dry. Now just for example, if I start putting another coat down somewhere, if I clean out my brush, take out most of the water, if I try to put down another layer now, I might start lifting up that first coat. And you can see it's starting to lift down to the paper. And that would be troubles, because if I put down another coat, then what will happen is I'll get an uneven variation of my color, that this area right in here might only have one coat, everywhere else will have two coats, if I don't lift up the paint anywhere else. Now that'll only cost me another layer, because once I have that color mixed, I could put down 3 layers, 5 layers, 10 layers, it's all going to end up the same color. So it's not critical if you start to get smudge marks, but what I can do is just wait for it to dry and start to paint over it. But now here's another thing, is this is just the exact opposite of watercolors, in the sense that acrylics, you might be able to see it, but when I first put it down, the color is a little bit lighter compared to when it dries. And this is a little something you might have to get the hang of also when it comes to working with acrylics. This line right in here will slowly disappear as that dries. And that is something that will also change. So if I want to just make this one solid layer of blue, we will go back and add gel layers to it to gradate that way also. That will be just another way of gradating. Now, if things go down one layer and you're happy with that, that's fine. But just be careful. It's all going to be on how you have your colors mixed. If they're fairly thick or fairly heavy, straight out of the tube with very little water, or matte medium or gloss medium, whatever you want to use, then they may cover pretty well. But I have this light blue mixed from previous paintings, and I'm just recycling it, so to speak, because once you have colors mixed, you could always use them for something else. Now, if I take this, just take it down a little ways, we're going to need a little bit of room so we could blend with gel after it dries. And I'm using a small brush because I want it to stay behind. In other words, that if I start painting and it's not dry yet, I wanted to show you how you can lift it up. But no matter what size brush you use, as long as you leave everything dry before the next coat, there won't be an issue. And that's why I often say sometimes that acrylics don't dry fast enough for me, because I'm all ready to put down another coat, but I got to make sure it's dry. And when you glaze them, it's a really great way to have color unity and very subtle value changes. And I see whiteboard coming through here and there, but that's not too bad. You can see how that all evened up now too, that it's all the same color. Just make sure you mix your colors well, or you might have your colors that you use to mix come through here and there. Okay, now just for the sake of argument, okay, now what I could do is go ahead, if I start adding matte medium to this, it's going to start thinning out the paint to the point where I could start blending it into the white and make almost like a painterly effect to it. And what I'll do is I'll just slowly keep adding matte medium till I get down to the white board. But just remember, you don't have to get everything right the very first time. This is just a suggestion. And I could blend it down into the white. And if I rinse out my brush and start taking straight matte medium to it, then that would even be a much quicker transition. But then just remember, if I start pushing color around now, I may start to sludge up some areas, and that's what usually can give somebody problems when they're trying to blend wet on wet with acrylics. It's already starting to dry, but at the same time, you're not done blending. All right, we'll just leave that like that. I took it down to a little bit of white. If I play with it too much, I'm going to start moving around and it'll start sludging up. So you got to just blend it quick and leave it go. Okay, now we'll leave this dry good, and then what I'm going to do is blend this down to a real hard yellow gold with gel, but that's many coats, but they're done real quick. So what I'll do is maybe the first coat, I could start up here, go down, second coat, third coat down, fourth coat down, fifth coat down, and then it's going to get really strong yellow down here, but then it'll slowly gradate up. But because I'm only taking it a little bit at a time, it's easier to make that transition. But when you build up gels, I'm only going to be using yellow. If I start using different colors of a purple or anything else that will work with what you're painting, then you're going to have real subtle variations of colors throughout that gel, because that clear gel is going to suspend those colors, and you're going to have some really nice glazing qualities with that setup. Let's go ahead and leave this dry, and we'll come back to it with our gel. Okay, our light blue is dry enough. This is the gel mixed with bronze yellow. There is very little color in here. It is, if I would have to guess, probably literally 1 to 20, maybe 20 times as much gel as I do have color, only because I'm trying to take it down just a little bit at a time. The first couple coats you may barely be able to see. And again, I use my watercolor brushes because I mix the paints so thin. I could use floppy, loose brushes. Now I'm going to just blend it out. I'm only trying to put a little bit of down at a time. I don't want to get ahead of myself, or I'll have a hard time spreading it out. And you could see that you probably can't see. It's just very little at a time. And this is what will make the gradation possible. Now, if I want to make it uneven or splotchy, we could do that too, but I'm going to try and keep it as even as possible going down. And again, this is a floppy brush, so I do have to be careful that it's not going to spread it very much. It's going to leave a little bit down at a time when I put it down. And I'll take it the whole way down so we could see it in the white. But I'm just trying to put a nice even coat. And the gel has a little bit of water in it also, so it's a little bit more spreadable. Now you'll be able to see the yellow maybe a little bit better down here up against the white, but we're going to keep on going with yellow. This is only the first of 5 or 6 coats, and we'll see what it ends up like down here at the bottom. You can see it's already starting to yellow pretty good down there. But we have to make sure this dries good though too, because the big difference with gel, if you start building up multiple layers too quick, then it will start to sludge up even quicker than adjust the matte medium and color. When you start mixing color with gel seems like it takes a little bit longer to really cure good before you could apply another coat. And then that way just make sure it's dry good, and that's it. And I am definitely not above taking a hairdryer to it to make sure it's dry. We're going to let that dry and come back, give it a second coat. Okay, layer 2. Okay, our layer 2 is pretty well dry. I'm going into layer 3. I'll start it about right in here, bring it down. But here's something very important, and the difference between gel and a color with matte medium. if I make a mistake, so to speak, and dig out some color on a matte medium solid color background, I could eventually just keep painting it out, and then it will cover and it'll end up the same color no matter what. With gel, I have colors underneath it, and it's also a transparent wash, so to speak. So if I dig a hole in this and reveal the blue underneath, it would be very difficult to fill in that hole to match the rest of what's around it without building more around it. So in other words, if I have a big hole here that I created because I didn't leave it dry long enough, I'm going to go down to pure blue, and then I'm going to have really heavy gobs of a yellow bronze around the edge. And if I keep trying to paint it, I'm going to just keep on adding more to the edge and only so much to the center. So point being is, if you make a mistake with a solid color, you can correct it eventually just by keep adding more and more layers, and it'll slowly paint out. Once you start glazing with a gel, that is much more difficult if you create a hole in your gel because you didn't leave it dry long enough. Let's go ahead and put on the next layer. Okay, this is our fourth layer already. Now what happens is, once I establish a nice clean transition from one coat to the other, then it's just a matter of making it a nice even coat if I want a nice gradation going down from top to bottom. Now if I want to make it splotchy, then nothing else matters. But again, this is only one color. If I start adding some violets or any other color in here, oranges or anything to snap it up a little bit, we will be doing that in future paintings. But the values and changes could be so subtle, you really have to see the painting to actually experience it. Let's go ahead and put down another layer. Okay, last coat, we'll start it right down in here. Okay, let's take a look and see what we have. About right in here, from here up is where our straight blue is, and then from here down is where the bronze yellow starts. And again, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when we get down to the bottom, we can see what a fifth coat of yellow does to the white paper. And it's starting to make it look pretty yellow. That's where you can really see how it built up over the coats. Again, this is a very interesting way of adding very subtle values of colors just to glaze them on, and especially if you have a bigger painting you're working with and you want to glaze layers of very subtle burnt siennas, whatever colors you want to work with to create a winter scene, then you could do that. Right now what we're going to do is just go in, do a little bit of sponge mixing, and then go ahead and create a painting from that background. Okay, this is just a basic Frederick's smooth portrait canvas, ready to go, 11 by 14. And just say, for example, we wanted to create a winter scene. I have some light cool gray here, and some medium gray neutral. Now we'll try and blend one to the other, and what we will do is use a sponge. And I have this sponge here. This is a natural sponge. Now obviously if I'd want texture in my background, I could use this and stipple it and give a very subtle texture depending on how well I'm going to mix down my paints. Or I could use this part right here and get more of a smoother transition. Now if I want a little bit of a both, then all I'd have to do is flip-flop the sponge, but just keep in mind the sponge will soak up a good bit of paint too. So as you start working it in, if you get a stipple effect that you don't want texture, then just a subtle smudge will get rid of that, and it will start to blend a little wee bit differently than just touching it straight down. Now what I want to do is drag a lot of this paint out to my palette, and I can even take some of it right off the palette and take it right to the canvas and then spread it out, and then just keep on blending it as long as it's wet and as long as I have a damp sponge. But keep in mind, we could get it as close as we can. What we could do is we don't have to get it exactly right on the first coat. We could blend in other colors, thin them down with the matte medium and a little bit of gel even, and blend it in and make a very complicated looking glazing background. So this is just one way of many. Now, if I wanted to go ahead and cover this entire canvas with white and then take these colors to it, it would blend them nice, but then that white is going to affect our colors. So it's the choice is up to you, that depending on what you want to end up with, if you want to use your exact colors as they are, then this is just an option to do that. Let's go ahead and get started. And I am going to pull out quite a bit of paint. And we'll start with the light on top. And I am going to work fast. And then keep in mind, this is only 11 by 14, so with that in mind, time frame is not going to be as critical as doing a much bigger painting, but at the same time, we can still do the same effect. In most cases, the way I mix my paints, often the first coat doesn't really even cover that well anyway. So I would do this 1 or 2 times, and then I can adjust as I go. Now we're going to get a little bit of this, and I'm going to mix the two together and just start my transition already. This small of a canvas, I could probably even do just wet on wet, but I'll still show you the sponge method just to show you. And you can see how it's mixing already. And as long as I keep everything wet, I can even mist it down a little bit with my spray bottle just to give me a little bit more time. Just like that. And that's it. Okay, and again, I could probably just about blend this. And you can see where the paint is not covering very well. Now, what I'm going to do is take some paint and start dabbing. And there are tons of air bubbles. Don't panic. This is how I did the exact background for the white-breasted nuthatch that I put on a white birch tree. I'll put that link up now. And I do have a little bit of subtle texture in the background, and I would prefer that versus just a perfect transition of paint. Okay, we'll let that dry and then see what we got. Okay, there's the first coat. You can see all the bubbles are gone. Everything's dried out, but you can still see that strong texture with the white background. That is digging down to the canvas still. And that means that I mix my paints thin enough that one coat is definitely not going to cover. But this gives us an opportunity to make a smoother blend, but we're using just the colors that we want. So again, this is just one way of doing this. If you want a subtle texture background, this is a pretty reliable way to do it. Let's go ahead and put in our next coat. And just say, for example, we're going to drag out a little bit of my titanium white thin. I'll put a daub of it down there, right there. And that's it. I can close up the drawer, put it back. But what we'll do is we'll make this white right up in here and then blend it down into the gray, the lighter gray, and then the darker gray down in here. That way it'll make it look like the light is coming from the upper left. Again, I just put it right in. And we're going to do this fast again. But you can see how much better it's covering. I still have a good bit of water even in my brush from when I rinsed it out. But it's a lot more coverage now, so to speak. And it's pretty much what we did the first coat is going to be pretty well gone. But that depends on how transparent I mix this layer of paint. So I'm not putting very much matte medium in it, so it's going to cover fairly well, but it'll still come through. And again, I could just about do this one wet on wet, because it's a small enough canvas. Then when I have the lighter gray still on my brush, that's the time to do it. But what I'm going to do with the sponge, though, it will give me a subtle texture that I can't duplicate with a brush. So although I can do this with a brush, if you want the nice smooth transition, that's fine. But I am looking for a little bit of texture. And I'm just taking it straight out, running into some brown in there. That's okay. And I'm putting it on a little bit heavier than I usually do, because the sponge is definitely going to soak it up. And then what we'll do is put that back, and then I'm going to grab a little bit of this right here, and then start up here. And we'll get our subtle texture. And if I start dragging out too much lighter colors down into my dark, then I can rinse it out with a cleaner sponge and then make that subtle transition. And I'll be pulling dark up into my light. That's where I'll really get some interesting textures. Again, this is just one way of many. But I want a real subtle texture. To be honest, I don't want it to look like a sponge did it. Just a very subtle texture. And that's what I would build off of from a painting. Let me rinse it out a little bit. I'm going to use a clean part. Daub up here. Put a little wee bit of texture. Very subtle. And it will change a little bit as it dries though too, as the acrylics will usually darken up just a little bit as they dry. But if you have some distant foliage in a background or anything like that that you want to start on, this would be a great way to start those shapes. Then obviously, again, if you have it planned out, you also don't have to have it just perfect rings. It could go up and down and a little bit here and there if it is distant. I'm going to use this textured side. If it is a low brush, and as long as it's wet, I could keep blending. But this is a pretty quick way to make a complicated background. I'm going to get a little wee bit more dark gray right down in here, just to keep this dark. And again, it helps that if I want to make a transition from white up here, take out that heavy a little bit. If I want to make a transition from lighter up here to darker down here, then it will help if I actually blend my colors as much as I can. In other words, instead of having one color going to a second color, have one color go into a little bit of darker color, a little bit darker yet, and then the darkest. The more bands of color I make, the easier it would be. Let me get my titanium white again, and we'll see if we can blend a little wee bit more white up here. I didn't rinse out the water out of my brush very much, and it might be a little bit too much water, but we're going to try. Okay, I'm going to get some subtle shapes in there. It's looking interesting. And as it's drying, I'm just slightly lifting. But the acrylics will give you such subtle gradations. Okay, let's let that dry. This up in here looks interesting, almost looks like a marble effect. I have some solid colors going up through here, and then the transition of the darker going into light. But I had a good bit of time to blend it and play with it, so if you're a little unsure, start out with a smaller painting and you'll be able to work these smaller areas a little bit easier than a large painting when you're trying to cover a lot of canvas or board at the same time. I'm just looking for the shapes now that I want to end up with. And then I'll leave it dry. Barely touching it. And that textured side will definitely give me a texture. Okay, we'll leave that dry and we'll see what we have and go on from there. Okay, here's what we're left with. Everything is pretty well all dried and ready to go. We have a very subtle texture there. Now, why would I want a texture? If I have a photo that I'm working from that has a ton of texture to it, then that may be a very good way to start, and then this way build off of that texture and go from there. Now, do we have such a photo? Yes, we do, right here. Okay, now that we got our photo, this is what we're going to be doing. Now, what I could do is start working in with the distant trees so you're barely able to see them. Now, what I'll do is I'll work with those same mixed grays. This way, I could take a little bit of that dark gray and mix it in with the lighter gray and then make trees so you can barely see them, and then put some whites back over them, but it would be again a toned down white. I'll use straight white, but then mix a little bit of that lighter gray with my white so it tones down the white and it's not a pure white. The white would be a little bit darker and less noticeable with less contrast as it goes back, and we'll save our brightest whites for up in here of just a low brush, and then some of the darker trees I'll just start painting them in, no drawings or nothing, and then we'll go ahead and try and fill this in and see if we can make this background work. Now, what I am going to do is tip the drawing table back up so I'm not reaching, or I put my head into the view of the camera itself. Then this way I'll stay out of the picture and we'll be able to go ahead and move forward. Let's get started. Okay, what I'm doing now is just laying in the distant trees without any snow at all. I'm using those same medium and dark grays mixed with my light blue. By mixing in my light blue, it will give me the opportunity to create values that you'll barely be able to see up against that light blue background. By going back to the colors involved makes it real easy for me to create values of distant shapes and trees. Now what I'm doing is just blocking in. These are what's called wild roses, and what I'm doing is laying in some of the branches. Depending on the angles of the branch, you may only see snow or you may see a little bit of the branch itself. but what I am doing is laying in my whites in layers. If I mix my white with a little bit of light gray, then it will push those snow shapes back into the distance, just like the trees. I'll save my pure whites and multiple layers of pure whites for the foreground snow. Let's take a look and see what we have. Okay, I put the canvas back down perpendicular to the camera so we could see it the way we're supposed to. And what I did was I only spent a couple hours on this painting and that's it. What I did though was I used the same grays and the white, and just like our reference, pure white up front, and it brought the lower brush closer to us, and then the distant trees. Now what I could do is go back over and refine some of these shapes just by adding shadows to the bigger highlight gobs, and then some of the snow in the background, I could break them up real easy just by using these same color light grays, and then even the medium gray on the trees, and then also just that same light gray in here in the snow itself. These would be actually wild roses. I'm familiar where this was photographed. Again, the same thing, just crisscrossing some of the branches in the distant background. It just adds complexity and texture. So now, my big point is, if you remember how textured that canvas was with the sponge, it all doesn't really make too much of a difference now, because there is a ton of texture in it now. What I will do though now is just go back in and refine some of the shapes and some of the shadows and highlights. But what I'll do is down here, I'm not going to add the darker colors to the same exact shape. I may only add some darker grays to the bottom of the highlighted shape. That way I'll be creating a highlight and a shadow at the same time. The same thing with a highlighted area, that if I put more white on just the top where it's a medium to a light gray, then what I would do is be adding a highlight in certain places and then leaving the shadowed part at the bottom. Now keep in mind, all I'm doing is adding the exact same color in layers. So if I use the whites and grays mixed together, I'll get that snowy effect pushed back into the painting. If I start using just pure white and layers of it, then I'll start adding more and more of the foreground brush that's covered up with snow, and then it'll push everything back. We're going to go ahead and finish this one and we'll see what we got. Okay, all I'm doing is making the branches a little bit more sporadic. I noticed that I had just about a straight line going across the top of my rose bushes, and that was very unnatural as far as nature goes. Again, if you're looking to start a new medium, whether it be acrylics, watercolors, oils, whatever, concentrate on your technique if you're looking to see if you're doing everything right, because otherwise it may be a compositional problem and not necessarily a technique problem. Okay, let's take a look and see what we have. Now, one thing I did change was I made this right in here and right in here a little bit more sporadic. And what I did was notice right away that I had a straight line going straight across. Compared to our reference, I could even have done it a little bit more. Now, obviously, it doesn't have to be exactly like your reference. You could change things around as you paint, put more emphasis on some things, less on others. And a photograph could always be improved because you only have what you have to work with there at that time, and that's it. Painting, we could add, subtract, all kind of things. Now, one thing I do want to make sure you know, that if you're painting a new technique, whether it be acrylics, watercolors, whatever, if you see issues with your painting and something's really bothering you about your painting, make sure it's a composition thing and not necessarily how you're painting. So it's very important to pick what you're going to paint and have just some kind of game plan with it. Now, our next painting we're going to go over right now, we'll go over the next photograph, and that will be our next demo and tutorial coming up. Okay, this is going to be our first painting we're going to do. Again, this is just the things we've been just going over. Up in here is the blues that we'll be using to start our sky and distant fog. And then down in here, from here down in here, is our distant tundra that will take these same blues up in here and mix them with various greens like a sap green, a Windsor green, all of those darker greens that will give us our subtle shapes of our pine trees right in here, and then also our blueberry bushes and the azaleas, which are subtle different greens that will make up our distant background. Once we get down into here, then we'll mix more and more green with that blue to make our distant foreground pine trees until we get to just about a pure green with our pine trees that are going to be considered the nearest to the viewer. Then down in here is nothing but azaleas and blueberries, which are very green since there's very little fog between them and the viewer. So this will be our first painting we will do in the 4-painting series. That will be coming up shortly. Until I see you out in the field or back at the studio, thanks for watching.